Meek. Let me introduce you to my friend, Meek. He sat at his computer, tongue licking his upper and lower lips in anticipation. A long-nailed, fat, grimy finger clicked on the mouse at a dizzying pace. An observer might have thought that there was some insane miniature tap dancer somewhere underneath all the piles of filth that surrounded the man. However, no tap dancer could effectively practice their talent in this cramped and deplorable dwelling. The apartment smelled old food, old clothes, old sweat, and old urine. Older keepsakes from a time when Meek was a different man than the behemoth sitting behind the computer now, peeked through the places that trash hadn't taken over yet. A narrow path had wound its way around the dwelling, taking Meek to the vital places he needed to go, when life interrupted. A path to the bathroom which was rarely used anymore, and another one that forked at a 30-degree angle to the apartment entrance. Others led to the kitchen, and what might have once resembled a dining room. Another path ended abruptly at the bedroom entrance, a ramp of filth almost reaching the smoke alarm above the doorframe. The high amount of detritus that formed these paths were monuments of showing sloth in the recent years, an involuntary story from the ground up. Most of the bottoms of them were newspaper he used, back when caring still seemed like a second nature, to soak up vomit and spilled beer. After insulating layers of refuse began to accumulate above them, however, the carpet became passé to his thoughts. An empty and flattened tampon box whose corner jutted out from one of those disgusting hillocks near his computer caught the corner of his eye. His wife, Marie, had left him about a year or more ago, but he barely remembered what she looked like. Even the dust and grime covered picture laying face up near the monitor offered a view of a woman he didn't really remember knowing. She took their infant daughter, Chrissy? Chrissa? He didn't remember, with her, as it became clear that Meek was quite incapable of anything else besides playing his online game. He suddenly kicked a small mound of pizza boxes under his desk, in frustration as his main game character felt his demise off the ravine into a pixelated lava below. The group he was running with would undoubtedly boot him out of the group, just for his failure to keep up. He kicked the mound again. His long, yellow big toenail pierced a hole through the box, and into what he perceived to be the wall beyond it. The pain barely even registered due to Meek seeing that his internet connection had been terminated. He stomped the other foot on the now moist and brown-colored spot to his left. A pungent smell that he had all but become immune to ran through his nostrils. He glanced at the fractured toenail, now resembling something of a misshapen, bloodied spear. He grabbed the foot in pain and cursed at the monitor before him, his game character's skeleton at the bottom of the molten orange doom. He worked hard to get his game character to this point. Now, this? Did he cut the coaxial cable that supplied his internet access with his toenail? Did he kick something else? Bald-headed Christ. Fuck! He shouted at the screen before him, middle finger echoing what the mountains of garbage near him wouldn't let his voice do. He quickly stood up, the crusty and stained seat cushion briefly sticking to his rear and bringing the chair up, then down with a plastic-wheeled bang. Trying to think quickly for a solution to his connectivity problem, he made his way along the path to the kitchen, slowly limping to the telephone. He was surprised at how much he had been sweating. Was the AC broken too? He silently thanked his dead mother for the trust fund that she had left him, that sustained him living these past couple of years. He would call the landlady after the cable company. He became lightheaded as his overweight frame limped along the refuse. He vomited into an empty cereal box before entering the kitchen, then grabbed a dusty, half-full beer off of what must have been the dining room table. He drank it, expelling the acidic taste from his mouth. Then he dry-heaved from the taste of the old beer. Thankfully, the taste of puke no longer lingered. He hadn't used the phone in ages. No need to, really. He used both of his hands to crawl through some of the hamburger wrappers and matted paper towels, to about where he estimated the phone to be. Several cockroaches scampered away from his touch, their surreptitious duties temporarily put on hiatus. He was correct in his assumption of where the phone should be. He was, however, incorrect in thinking that the phone was still there. He faintly remembered Marie saying how the phone ringer would wake the baby up at night. Since they could only afford a one-bedroom apartment at the time, the kid had to sleep in the living room. And since they both had cell phones, a home phone seemed redundant. So, did she move it? Put it away? Throw it out? Fuck me, he said as he picked a small, itchy brown piece of dust from the back of his leg. His toe was bleeding much worse now. The toenail was much worse than he thought as he examined it in the brighter light of the kitchen. The nail cracked vertically all the way down, apparently breaking beneath the skin as well. His toe was easily twice the size it had been before his grumpy trek into the kitchen, and it was a sick wetting of purple and yellow. Meek didn't know the first place to look if Marie had put it somewhere, and quite frankly, he didn't feel like digging through more mounds to look. The other option was the bedroom. There was a landline connection in there. Maybe it was buried somewhere in there. His desire to get back to his game, coupled with his throbbing foot, prodded him to go back and look. He wobbled along the path to the bathroom, straight down the hallway. The carpet he tread on made a sickening wet sound. He paused to glance into the bathroom he'd stopped using months ago. A brown conical shape of solid brown and green substance protruded from the grimy toilet. He could see several flies tending to their young among the shape, buzzing with parental defense as they sensed Meek's presence. Matted balls of toilet paper stood knee-high, occasionally broken by the mouths of an empty beer bottle. Bottle tops looked almost like brown mouths drowning in a sea of disgust. Smears and handprints of a darker color lined the tiled walls. A picture hung by the entrance of the bathroom. Meek and Marie stood in front of the lake at Epcot Center. The baby was nestled in Meek's arms, a peaceful shroud of sleep evident on her face as a happy father kissed her forehead. Was that taken before or after the wedding, he thought. He remembered the day. The baby cooing as the boat made its way through the tunnels in the Mexican section of the park. He had no idea why, but he also remembered Marie giving him a light, tender kiss on the neck as the boat sloshed its way through the final artificial passage. He made his way toward the bedroom entrance, having to limp his way through the trash that he didn't remember making. Glancing behind him, he noticed that he left a red trail as his foot dragged. Clearing the way to the door took longer than he thought. There were several large boxes hidden beneath the garbage that were heavier than he expected. Their content was unimportant, as the longing of getting back to his game took precedent over all else. They were stacked high as well, nearly reaching the doorframe. Throwing the last box behind him down the hallway with a grunt, he grabbed the doorknob and tried to open the bedroom door. It was locked. After several minutes of determination, a few pulls from his obese frame, and many curses of frustration, the door finally gave way, splintering the frame and showering Meek's forearm with wooden debris. The room was dark, cool, and, well, surprisingly clean. The light shone from the hallway behind him, exposing the motes of dust that chaotically danced at the door being thrust open. Had he really not come in here in that year or two? The carpet was the perfect beige it was when the family moved in a few years ago. Pictures that Marie picked out still hung around the room. Persian beatnik monstrosities that Meek still gave a distasteful glance to. She insisted that, since there was no windows in the room, that it would make it as sunny as it could be. The bed was still made, the dark brown comforter looking eerily the same color as the purulescent contents of the bathroom. The phone was still on the nightstand on the side of Meek's bed where he used to sleep during the cheerier times. With the sigh of relief that the heroin user could relate to after finally getting that reclusive fix, he limped over to the phone. One foot left a bloody streak, and the other one left a brown footprint on the unmarked carpet. Sitting down on the bed, he picked up the phone's receiver and started to dial when he noticed a square shape sitting in the corner. Since he hadn't turned on the light when he came in, and the hallway's light didn't reach the corner, he couldn't make out what it was. He gave his foot a rub and, hand coming back up bloody, he winced in pain as the dread of realization crept up on him. There was no dial tone. This could only mean one thing. Marie had canceled the service at some point without telling him. Or, more likely, he didn't pay it after she left. He couldn't remember. Grabbing the phone in frustration, he threw it in the direction of the square-shaped thing in the corner, cursing. He was getting very lightheaded now, the coolness of the room doing little to alleviate the sweat drenching his balding, fleshy head. He stood and hobbled over to the square thing in the corner. As he came up behind it, he grabbed the edge of it and winced in pain, his foot feeling like it was on fire. He looked into the square thing, now finally realizing what it was. Not just because of its physical shape, but its contents. A long decayed corpse of an infant laid in the center of the playpen. The skin almost resembled one of those purple, super hot peppers. He used to see them at the grocery store, making a bizarre spiral pattern among the top of the skull. The infant had a permanent scream wrinkled on its face, as though it saw something horrible before its death. That horrible thing must have been loneliness, Meek thought as he glared at his daughter. That thought was quickly dashed, however. He noticed another figure sitting upright in the corner beyond the crib. Marie's eyeless face pointed at the ceiling in a look of pain, as if she died crying. One hand still rested on the corner of the playpen, the other down the shirt where she breastfed. She must have given the infant, Christina, that was her name, one last meal before she herself expired. Cursing in worried anticipation, he picked up the phone. It was still thankfully in one piece, with the cord attached to the wall, and hobbled to the bedroom door, deciding to try the kitchen phone plug. Now he was in a feverish desperation. He made his way through the doorframe and immediately saw a problem. The heavy boxes that he had thrown behind him in a frenzy moments before now made a heavy wall that merged with the garbage pile. He could see a portion of his computer monitor behind it, and a bubbly orange haze through the cardboard and refuse. His foot throbbed and his chest contorted in pain. Self-preservation began to take hold of his fevered body. Dropping the phone, he fell to his hands and knees and crawled towards the barricade. The first box wasn't so bad, but the next one was impossible, positioned as he was. He slumped over it and sensed a cockroach that he must have only partially killed with his weight tickle the side of his torso. Just a rest, he mumbled. The kitchen is right around the corner. So close. I'll have my internet back within an hour. Just one phone call, he thought. Longingly, he looked at his computer screen through the cardboard and refuse cracks. His heart finally took his frustration, his toe pain, and him along with it. There were too many doors in the upstairs hall. Sarah told her parents, but they couldn't see it. They told her not to worry. They told her that there was nothing there. But there was an extra door at the end of the upstairs hall. An extra yellow door, and it didn't belong. It was the color of disease, jaundiced and infected, with spidery black veins across its face. One perfect silver knob gleamed in its center, above the shadowy keyhole, and it didn't look right. The knob shone with a mirror's finish, and it caught the light from any angle, begging for Sarah to look its way. Sarah did her best to ignore it, but the door knew her name. It would whisper to her when she drew near. Sarah. The door would rasp with a voice like dried leaves, as tiny claws scraped against the other side. Tears would well up in Sarah's eyes as she would hurry past it, her arms laden with everything she would need to get ready for the day. Sarah. It would call out to her again as she shuffled out of range and closed the bathroom door, cutting off its paper-thin wails. When she would creep from the bathroom to head downstairs, the voice would follow her with a furious flurry of scraping claws and tormented howls. They lingered and gnawed in the back of her mind as she'd rush through breakfast, just so she could get out of the house a few minutes sooner. School became a blessing, an excuse to be someone somewhere else. At school, she could forget the door. At school, she could pretend that her house was like everyone else's, with the correct number of doors and no eerie whispers. But at the end of the day, it was still waiting for her upstairs at the end of the hall, with its mirror ball knob and yellow face. She hated coming home knowing that it was there. But even more than that, she hated going to sleep, because in her dreams, she would open up the door. Every night she stood before it, fighting the urge to reach out. Dread knotted her belly in anticipation and pain when her hand rose to grasp the silvery knob. Some nights it burned her like the driest ice. Other nights, it seared like red-hot coal. Very occasionally, it didn't either. Instead, turning and turning without ever opening the door. She couldn't stop turning it until she woke up. When the door did open, it revealed a swirling vortex of shadow and sound, with 1,000 voices crying in the darkness. Voices curled around her, crawling through her hair like spiders. She thrashed and swatted at their skittering whispers, but the voices still tingled across her skin. She never should have listened. "He sees," they said. "He hears," they moaned. "He hungers," they wept, and burrowed into her mind like worms. The Hollow Man. The Hollow Man. They echoed in her mind and screamed from the gaping vortex. The Hollow Man. He hunts. Sarah shot up with a scream that night, gasping and sweating, but she was alone in her bed. The clock's crimson face said midnight, and it had passed, but not by much. Darkness enveloped her room, except where a vestigial nightlight illuminated the corner by her desk. It wasn't much, but she felt better when she saw it. She pulled the bedsheets over her head and pushed away the echoing voices. "I'm fine," she swore, hugging her knees and rocking back and forth. "It's just a dream. They're always just dreams. The dreams will go away like they always do." She started humming a song her mother used to sing when she was smaller, small enough to need the nightlight, and the panic faded little by little with every note. "Just a dream," she repeated. "Just a dream. Just a... Sarah?" Someone whispered from down the hall. She froze. "Sarah? Are you Sarah?" It was the voice of a girl, not much younger than her, and not at all like the usual voice that she heard from the door at the end of the hall. Who are you?" She whispered back from beneath the sheets. "My name is Lizzie. Are you Sarah?" Sarah didn't move. She was terrified of leaving the safety of her cocoon. As the moments ticked past, however, an anxious curiosity emboldened her, just enough to peek out from the covers. What if it was another girl, she thought. She sounded just as scared as Sarah felt. Sarah crawled from her bed, clutching the sweat-damp nightshirt that she wore to sleep, and she waited. When nothing happened, she stood up and tiptoed toward her bedroom door, toward the waiting yellow door, with the mirror ball knob, on the wall at the end of the upstairs hall. When she stood before it, her stomach lurched, and for a moment, she couldn't tell if she was going to vomit or faint. "Please," the door said in a young girl's voice when Sarah got close. "Please, are you Sarah?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but her voice was but a tiny squeak of nothing. She pressed her palms into her cheeks as she smeared away tears before trying again. Yes, she finally managed. "I'm Sarah." "Please let me in." The door's silvery knob shook violently, rattling as if locked and jostled by someone on the other side. Sarah stumbled back with a gasp, staring at the shuddering alien doorknob. "Let me in, Sarah, please! I can't stay here. Please help me. Let me in." Sarah dropped to her knees when her legs gave out, and she screamed when she looked at the door. Level with the shadowy keyhole below the rattling knob, she stared directly into a very human eye. Tears shimmered in the eye, as they shimmered in Sarah's. It darted around, wide and white with fear, as if searching through the hallway, and then without warning, the keyhole became a shadow, and the silver knob stilled. The girl on the other end began to cry. "Sarah, please," she pleaded. "He's almost here." "Who? The Hollow Man?" Sarah whispered as a chill started up her spine. Lizzie sobbed quietly. Sarah scooted closer to the door, her fear growing colder when the girl on the other side didn't answer. "Lizzie?" Silence fell as if it had always been there. She couldn't hear Lizzie crying anymore. Even the house was too quiet behind her. Sarah put her ear to the door and held her breath. She waited. Minutes passed, but it couldn't have been minutes. Nothing moved. Nothing whispered. Nothing cried. Nothing stirred. She couldn't hear anything but her own racing heart. Was she gone? Lizzie? She tried again, afraid that the hollow man had taken her. He's here, Lizzie whispered at last, almost in her ear, as though Lizzie's lips had pressed tightly against the keyhole. Please, let me in. Sarah's head ached. The world was a little fuzzy around the edges. It was harder to focus than before. She tried to stand up, but she didn't dare touch that sickly door. But her legs felt too wobbly and weak to support her. She reached for the doorknob with a trembling hand. Please, Sarah. Her voice was getting smaller. Please. Grasping the mirror doorknob, she pulled herself from the door. It moved noiselessly beneath her hand, gliding without resistance. And she opened the yellow door. A lonely expanse of normal wall inched into view, and she felt sick. She worried at her thumb in confusion, and extended a trembling hand to touch the wall behind the door. It was solid as any normal wall upstairs at the end of the hall should be. But her stomach churned. She gently closed the door, which issued a soft click as the latch sprang into place, and she waited. She hardly dared move or breathe as she listened to the night, waiting for the door to speak again. Hours passed in this oppressive silence, even though it couldn't have been hours. The door had nothing to say. Sarah grew sleepy, too sleepy to keep standing, too sleepy to remember why she was still standing at the end of the hall upstairs. It was time to go to bed. It's just a dream, she remembered, turning away and rubbing her eyes. They're always just dreams. Shuffling to her bed was like swimming through jello. Most of the way there, she couldn't keep her eyes open. Luckily, she knew the way. The dreams will go away. They always do. The crimson clock was broken when she rolled herself back into bed, the face declaring 2:16 a.m., to a room that only vaguely felt familiar. But she couldn't bring herself to care when her eyes and body felt so heavy. Sarah, Lizzie whispered, but it couldn't be a whisper. Sarah, Lizzie whispered. Sarah, don't wake up. She groaned a little. Don't wake up, Lizzie said, her voice echoing in Sarah's mind. Sarah frowned and rolled onto her back. She didn't want to wake up. She wanted to stay asleep. Lizzie didn't need to tell her not to wake up, because not being awake was the whole point of being asleep. For a long time, all was silent. Sarah's mind drifted, and she felt herself grow lighter, as if getting ready to float up and into the darkness that surrounded her. She could feel the cool sheets beneath her, and for a moment, she thought she heard the papery thin rustle of leaves in her room. He's here, Lizzie whispered at last. Please, don't wake up. Who's here? Sarah wondered as she steadily rose. His hollow face, an eerie mask, with hollow voice at doors will ask, to be invited in to bask, above his favorite midnight task. A strange tingling worked its way up Sarah's body as Lizzie recited the haunting rhyme in a disconcerting monotone. Clarity inched its way toward her slowly, melting away the fog of sleep. Hadn't she been dreaming? Was she still dreaming? No, something was wrong. He's waiting inches away from your face, to be the first thing that your eyes grace. Keep them shut, or else embrace a hollow shell to take your place. Cold dread had seized Sarah's heart with each new stanza, and she trembled with the weight of her mistake. For a moment, she swore that she could feel the air stir above her, stale and strangely warm against her cheeks. Leaves rustled above her bed. The yellow door you always keep, he follows you to where you sleep. In your room, he then will creep, your life in dreams for him to reap. Lizzie's voice became little more than breath within Sarah's mind. The air cooled around her with the pressure lifted off her chest. The leaves were in the hall, the hollow man above your bed, with hollow eyes, deep slumber fed. His hollow dreams may fill your head, but never peek, or you'll be dead. Everything was wrong. Distantly, Sarah registered the sound of her parents screaming in their room, and felt tears sliding down her cheek. No longer dream tears. She could feel the real, wet warmth as each one fell. "Mommy," Sarah whispered and sounded paper thin. "Daddy." Her voice rasped like dry leaves. "Lizzie," she thought, but Lizzie did not respond. Silence fell over the house, and Sarah knew nothing would ever be right again. From the hall outside her bedroom door, Sarah heard the soft click as a latch sprang into place and waited. Silence filled the house again. The leaves were gone. Sunlight peeked through the curtains, and the crimson clock said that it was 7:45 a.m. Before she felt it was safe enough to open her eyes and leave the room, the yellow door with its mirror ball knob stared at her from the wall at the end of the hall upstairs, and the house was still too quiet. It was a different quiet than before, though. It was a different quiet from her dream. It was the quiet of a tomb. Except, of course, for the occasional tapping, as if from tiny claws, from the other side of the yellow door. Having some difficulty staying awake there? Trying to study for some big exam or finish some last-minute assignment you put off until the weekend, and now it's 3 in the morning and you are absolutely exhausted? Or perhaps you were in a similar state recently, and you're looking for help on what to do? Well, friend, I have just the prescription to ease your weary little mind. All you need to do is win a game. Setting up the game is relatively simple. All you need is an hourglass, a candle, and a marker. Let me make one thing specifically clear. You need an hourglass. Not one of those rinky-dink 30-second pieces of shit that you get in a cereal box or a board game. Before playing the game, test your hourglass to make sure it takes an hour or just slightly longer to drain out all of the sand from the top section into the bottom. Having it take slightly longer will help, but too long or too short, and you'll run into complications during the game. You must also be completely alone in the room while playing. Once you are ready to play, you may choose any room that can be sealed, simply meaning that all doorways and windows can be closed. Any other form of timekeeping device or alarm must be taken out of the room prior, or the game will not begin. The hourglass will be your only time tracking tool, hence why having an accurate hourglass is pretty important. Having anything with an electronic display must also be removed, including TVs, cell phones, computer monitors, anything. Leaving them in the room during the game will put you at a massive, massive disadvantage. You may begin the game at 8 p.m. Make sure that the room is sealed, drawing the curtains to block out any outside light. Then, draw a simplistic hourglass shape on the back of one of your hands. Make sure to remember well which hand it was, since you'll mostly be in the dark for this game. Take the candle and light it, then turn off all the lights. Sit down on the floor with the 3 previously mentioned objects all close together. Then finally flip the hourglass so the sand begins to fall into the empty half. The only source of light in the room should be your candle. Now yell something along the lines of, "I'm not tired, I refuse to go to sleep." Close your eyes and then count to 10. Then open them again. You won't be entirely sure, but somewhere in the room, you'll think you can see the shadowy outline of a man. You've begun the game, and your opponent is none other than the master of sleep himself, the Sandman. Do not provoke him, and don't speak to him either. You've challenged him, and in a way insulted him about his profession, so he's probably not in the best mood to say the least. Now comes the game. Your task is to stay awake as long as possible, to a maximum of 8 hours, which will take you to about 4 a.m. Every hour you must flip the hourglass to reset it and keep the game going. Each time you flip the hourglass, you may take the marker and draw a tally mark on your arm, the specifics of which arm will be explained later on. And don't think you can just flip the hourglass 8 times really quickly, or draw 8 lines on your arm. The hour needs to pass in order for the magic, quote unquote, to work. If you fail to flip the hourglass before the very last grain of sand falls, or you should succumb to sleep, you'll lose. During this time, the Sandman will be deploying as many tricks as possible to get you to fall asleep or give in. See, the bottom half of your hourglass at any time represents his power, and the more sand in it, the stronger his influence will be. Almost immediately upon starting, you'll begin to feel drowsy. This is merely nothing but his presence. If you can't last against this, stop playing immediately. During the first hour, he won't do a lot. He may walk around the room, but he won't touch or speak to you, even if you try to talk to him, which is something you should really avoid doing. There will be no response. Also, don't move from your spot to approach him. The closer you get, the more drowsy you will become, and if you're not near the candle, he may put it out so you go to sleep. Do not distract yourself during this time. You may easily lose track of whatever time is going on, and forget to flip the hourglass. The Sandman can also skew your perception of how much time has passed, but he cannot affect the hourglass. So keeping your focus on that is the best chance of winning. Side note, if you try to leave the room, you'll find that all the doors are locked, and the windows reveal nothing but unyielding darkness as far as you can see. After the first hour passes, the Sandman may scoff, but he will continue to stay in the room. Now, he will begin to pull out more from his bag of tricks. He's seen that you're going to be hard to put down. The sound of music boxes and harps may be heard, at first from a distance, but they will slowly grow to a level that may be audible and comforting. Resist the urge to close your eyes and listen. Your body will grow more weary as hour 2 and 3 approach, depending on how the Sandman is feeling that night. Around this point, he will begin speaking to you in many voices. The voice of a young girl, the wise cackling laugh of a grandparent, or perhaps the ever-loving recognizable words of your own mother. They will try to congratulate you on surviving for so long with the Sandman, for braving the sleepless days and nights to win the game. They'll whisper lullabies and nursery rhymes just to fill your head. But you know better. Say nothing. Ignore the voices, no matter how real they may seem. Do not listen to them. Do not go to sleep. If you manage to make it to the halfway point, you have 4 hour marks on your arm. You'll be nothing less than exhausted, and the Sandman will be nothing less than enraged. He'll try to manipulate your environment even more, start using new tactics to get you to go to sleep. Instead of trying to lull you to sleep, he'll attack you. Hallucinations will occur. You'll see horrifying images of dead hanging people from the ceiling, flashed up by a spotlight of unknown origin. You may see the room start to close in, and then stretch out, and then close in again, and stretch back out. A whisper in your ear will turn into shouting in your face from some invisible source. Already weakened and sleep deprived, your remaining energy will just be drained out in bursts, just from his terrors. You may have sudden adrenaline rushes, sure, but the Sandman is clever. He'll time them so you can't just survive the next hour by simply being anxious. He'll wait for your emotional state to have fallen to another level, and then bam! 2 rotted feet dangling in front of your face. You can scream all you want, you can beg him to stop, but this will only use up your ability to function. At the 6 hour mark, the hallucinations will shift between horror and comfort, while the Sandman will begin to pick your brain and find what nightmares caused you to come to a cold sweat many a night. Others will coax you towards a slumber, claiming that you've put up with enough and that you deserve a rest. A warm bed to tuck yourself into, a pillow made from the softest furs and feathers. Harps and music boxes will start to overload your sense of hearing. In your state, you may welcome the chance to sleep, but snap out of it. Have you been watching the hourglass? Make sure his terrors aren't distracting you. This is why you don't talk to the Sandman. Every tiny detail about yourself that you give to him, he will use against you here. This is also the part where electronics can become a massive problem. They will turn on, regardless if they're powered or not, and should you gaze upon their mystifying image for too long, your eyelids will droop, your body will collapse onto the floor, and if you just turn the screens away, the Sandman might use some of his muscle and turn it back towards you, just so you can get a better view. The curtains open to a brilliant dawn or a blue sky, but the only truths in this room are your arm and the hourglass. Unless you have 8 marks, the game is not over. Use any ounce of strength you have to flip that hourglass. Now an immense chore from the Sandman's influence. Scrawl a line down your arm with the marker, even if it looks like you're taking a knife and slashing your own arm open. During the final hour, the Sandman will begin to address you directly, asking you questions that appear simple, but as you are, you can't even remember what 2 + 2 equals. A question is the hardest thing to get out of your head, so don't let it get in. Cover your ears and just watch the hourglass. Keep those eyes open. Don't fall asleep. If a question gets in your head, you'll start to think about it, adding more stress and draining what little mental will you have left. It might become hard to breathe, as if something is squeezing your lungs, or the air is dense and hard to take in. The Sandman will also get physical, grabbing you and throwing you across the room, leaving a crawl mark on the hourglass before time is up. If you glimpse his face, that alone may be enough of a nightmare to haunt you and to keep your eyes from shutting. There will be no distinguishable facial features, save for 2 bloody eyes, lids torn from the sockets, just endlessly staring at you. If you can't take it anymore at this point before the 8th hour is complete, take the hourglass and break it with all your might. Both sections of the glass must be broken to end the game. For your sake, you better hope it was made of glass. Anyone who has made it to the 7th hour mark has never had the strength to successfully break it, so they either carried on or surrendered to their dreams. You will not receive a reward for ending the game this way, save for the mercy of avoiding the Sandman's wrath. If you do make it to the end of the 8th hour without falling asleep, you will not need to flip the hourglass again. Simply make the 8th mark on your arm and close your eyes. Though you ended the game, you can't sleep just yet. There is one final task remaining. All you must do is wait for the Sandman to collect the hourglass and say, "You're all grown up now. Sleep when you wish." Open your eyes and find that the hourglass is gone and the candle is put out. Now you may collapse into a slumber. A 12-hour slumber, to be precise. The game puts a heavy strain on your mind and body, so recovery is necessary. But it's the last sleep you will ever need, or at least to that length. Once you've fully recovered, you'll be able to stay awake an extra hour for each tally you marked up on your arm. Depending on your normal sleep schedule, this may mean you only need a small nap, maybe even an hour or 2 at most. But for some, you'll never lie down again. Sure, you may have the ability to if you want to, and you can even still dream, but there will never be any weariness following you. Just think of how productive you can be with that. But it's not all sugar plums and gumdrops. If you mark a tally on your arm that was not marked by the hourglass, you will instead require more sleep, 1 hour for each tally on the blank arm to be precise. You will require more rest to be able to function throughout the day. Now, these marks can cancel out the ones on your marked arm, but if that's not the case, you may have gone through all that suffering only to come out worse than before. And with your delirious state throughout the game, it's unlikely for the average individual to come out with all their tallies on the marked arm. Then again, there's also the circumstances of losing. If you fail to flip the hourglass, then the Sandman will gain full power, and with the snap of his fingers, you'll collapse on the ground, regardless of how you fell asleep, be it by failure to flip the hourglass or just succumbing to your own tiredness. You will also need to sleep 12 hours to recover, but it'll be the worst sleep you ever have, and the Sandman will make damn sure that is the case. The worst nightmares you can ever think of will flood your mind, leaving you unable to escape or wake up in the relief of a cold-filled sweat. All you can do is endure the torture of a dream that feels like a year long. And finally, when you do come to consciousness the next morning, there you'll be, lying on the floor of the room that you played the game in, the marks still on your arm, and blood flowing from where your eyelids once rested. You said you refused to close your eyes and go to sleep. The Sandman just simply granted that wish. String theory. Have you ever had an experience that suggested someone else was in your house and just thought, I don't even want to know, and left it? Sometimes, fear of the unknown just seems like the preferable option to facing real, tangible, concrete danger. Normally it's nothing though. One time the beeper function on my wireless phone went off, and I was the only one home. It could only be called from the living room. Another time, I swear to God, someone took some change off my desk. They're probably all just slightly disconcerting tricks of the mind though. But what would you do when something truly suggestive happens? Would you run, or just ignore it like I did? Last Monday was a normal day. Got up, brushed my teeth, and changed into my school clothes. All little parts of my morning ritual. It seemed like a totally unnoteworthy day. Until I saw the strings. There were 3 or 4 thick twines of string in my room. They crisscrossed between the walls around my bed, one attached to the door. No way I could have missed them before. I should have tripped over them. They were tied to pins in the wall, which had also not existed before 10 seconds ago. Nobody could have been in my room while I was in it, let alone set all this up. It was early, and my brain wasn't processing things correctly yet. I simply discredited the site and untied the strings and left for school, leaving behind a balled up twine on my desk. It didn't get any better later. Outside the house there were hundreds of them, tied between houses, around cars, across streets. This had to be some sort of super elaborate prank, like one of those hidden camera shows or comedy improv blog. Then they'd gotten everyone else to play along too. Passers-by were tangled in them, tying them to objects they were walking towards and away from, as if they had been and were continuing to follow a course laid out for them. I nervously continued my journey to school. On the bus, everyone was tied to the door. At school, groups of kids were tied to each other. Teachers were tied to their desks and boards. Oddly enough, all I could do was wonder why I had been left out. My friend Lucy sat beside me in first period. She simply plunked her bag down on her lap and rested her chin in her hand, looking right past me toward the window outside. "Hey, Lucy," I said. No response. "Come on, I didn't expect you to be in on this too." She sighed and started taking her books from her bag. All the books were tied to her hands. I grinned and yanked one of the strings off a book. She didn't seem to notice. Instead, she simply just disregarded the book completely, letting it drop onto the floor without a moment's hesitation. I leaned down, picking up her book for her and placing it on her desk. She didn't even notice that. Well, if that's how we're going to play it, I smiled, trying to look playful, but really just trying to hide my nervousness. I bundled all the strings up attached to her with one hand, and then pulled them free. She blinked, turning to stare at me. "Holy shit, Martin, are you like a ninja or something?" "I've been sitting here for 10 minutes, I smiled again, relieved my friend had finally noticed me. "Where did all those strings come from?" she gasped, seeming to notice them for the first time. I just kind of assumed you were all fucking with me." She stood up, backing into the corner. No one else in class noticed. "They weren't here just a minute ago. Do you see them too?" Her tone made it clear that she was genuinely scared. "No, didn't you?" I was interrupted by my teacher slamming the door behind her. Everyone except me and Lucy murmured good morning. Still, no one seemed to pay attention to either of us. "People have been ignoring me all day," I said to her, before turning to the teacher. "Hey, you dumb bitch! You can't teach for shit!" No reaction. I'm getting away from all this shit. Lucy pulled a few strings aside and left class. I followed, and surprise, surprise, nobody noticed. We wandered the corridors, leaving and entering classes as we saw fit. Whatever we untied, a chair or a book or whatever from someone else, it was like it suddenly didn't matter to them. Like it didn't even exist. I showed her the streets outside. There were more strings than when I came in this morning, like twice as many. We carefully picked our way through the tangle, making our way to a nearby coffee shop. Not particularly grand, I know, but what would you do in our situation? As I said, the fear of not knowing sometimes seems like the safer option. On a few occasions, I suggested that we untie a few people. Lucy was opposed to it, remembering how terrified she had been. In the coffee shop, we grabbed a couple of sandwiches and drinks out of the fridge. We found a table, untied all the strings, and sat down. We both ate in silence, both of us too scared, both of us distracting ourselves by watching the strangers in the shop. They were all just oblivious to the strings. After about 20 minutes, Lucy spoke up. "Now she's going to take that sandwich," she said, pointing at a woman across the shop. Sure enough, she took the sandwich wrapped in plastic that she was tied to. She pays for it and leaves. She did so, according to the prophecies of the strings. That guy doesn't intend to pay. I watched as a man took his coffee and ran out of the store. Two servers just looking too exasperated to go after him. "This is horrible," she whimpered. "Can we go, please?" Outside, it wasn't much better. Everyone just followed the string's instructions, going about their daily lives. Lucy announced that she was going home to sleep this off. I agreed to walk her home. She lived about only 10 minutes away. Away from the busier part of town, there were many fewer strings. It was nicer. We could pretend that this wasn't happening. When we turned onto Lucy's street, she stopped me, her mouth falling open. "What now?" I broke the silence, my voice sounding surprisingly small. "Look." She pointed outside of one of her neighbor's houses. "And I'll take my memory of that moment with me till the day I die. A little dark imp, maybe 3 feet tall, walking along with its knuckles on the ground almost like a monkey. It had 2 bulbous yellow eyes about half the size of its face. No mouth or any other facial features. It was holding a hammer and a ball of twine, which it was letting out behind it. It walked quickly and quietly from door to door from the house to the mailbox. It stopped hammering a nail into the side of the box. It tied the string around it. It turned to face us, and it stopped when it spotted us. My bottom fell out even further than it already had been, but it just stared at us with a look of surprise and curiosity. You could almost say that it was the more frightened one. Suddenly, it beckoned us with its tiny little hand. I looked at Lucy. She hadn't moved. I looked back at the imp, which stared at me. I halved the distance between us, and then halved it again. It wasn't the fear of the unknown anymore. It was fear of this little guy. It didn't seem like anything to be scared of. When I was about a meter away from it, it extended its hand. Hi. I shook it. It nodded in approval, blinking its massive yellow eyes up at me. "So you're the one in charge of the strings?" It nodded eagerly. I called Lucy over, but she stayed where she was. "There are more of you?" Another nod. I wanted to ask it so many questions about what it was and where it came from, but it seemed for now that it was only yes or no questions. Do we even have free will?" It just looked at me, almost sadly. I immediately felt sick to my stomach, and I couldn't bear looking at this little monster anymore. I grabbed Lucy, who had been listening to our conversation, and now sat on the curb with her head in her hands. "Come on," I said. We entered her house, and I made her a cup of tea. When I found her in the living room, she had untied her dog and was curled up with it, crying. I sat the tea down and sat beside her. "I'm so scared," she whispered, after a good 10 minutes of sobbing. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. "I'm going to sleep," she mumbled silently, and she was under within a minute. Sleep was starting to sound pretty good all of a sudden. My eyelids felt like they were being weighed down. I collapsed onto the rug. The last thing I heard before I fell asleep was the scurrying of several sets of little nearby feet. I felt much better the next day, as if the whole affair had been a dream. I probably would have believed that if I hadn't woken up to Lucy's mother that morning, wondering what I was doing sleeping over without her permission or something like that. Over breakfast, Lucy asked me why I looked so pale and nervous. I turned to her and smiled, mumbling something about being sick. But the truth was, I was scared, because I couldn't see any strings. I was wondering whether or not my actions were truly my own. The long list. When Melissa was 14 years old, her father sold her to a crank cook named Possum for 2 pounds of crystal meth and a broken down Trans Am. Possum kept her chained up to a rusty wood stove during the day, with just a mason jar of water and a box of Cheerios, while he worked in the lab in the back behind the trailer, breaking down Sudafed and ephedrine tablets into glass shards of amphetamine. In the evening, Possum would swing the door open, and the cat-like piss stench of burning chemicals would enter the trailer. He'd unchain her so she could make his meals, wash the dishes, and mop up. At night, as the bullfrogs would begin to croak and the crickets chirp, she would press her fist into her mouth, trying to stifle cries of pain as he lay upon her, his rank smell of sweat and chemicals just overwhelming her. 2 months later, a couple of Boy Scouts found her naked corpse in a drainage ditch in a patch of woods outside Eureka, California. A pale tangle of limbs sticking out of the trash and sewage of the dirty culvert. Though the case officially went to Homicide Detective McClenny, Detective Stanler had been the one at the crime scene assisting. Stanler had helped her take her body by the arms and pull her remains from the rank sewer and debris. Her body rose up from the muck. Her head had lollied from side to side, eyes wide staring, looked at him. For a moment, Stanler thought he saw a few flickers of life register in them, though her gray bloated face clearly revealed that she was long, long dead. Stanler settled deeper into the seat of his car, and he flipped open a battered copy of Hamlet, scrolling down the long list of names he had scrawled on the last page. What a fucking week. Suspended and out on bail, looking at manslaughter charges. He was parked in front of the police chief's suburban home, waiting for that fat fuck to arrive home from work. He eyed the long list and sipped a pint of wild turkey, washed it down with a warm Budweiser, and he thought to himself, someone who could do something like that to a 14-year-old girl, how can you let someone like that live? Who could possibly miss them? Who could even possibly care? No one did. Nobody missed that piece of shit Possum. 2 weeks paid administrative leave was all Stanley received, after he emptied his service revolver into that sick degenerate's face. It had been a big bust. The lab, kilos of meth, and arsenal of weapons, everyone at the department was happy, and all he had gotten was 2 weeks paid leave and a wild party at the Alibi, thrown by the other detectives and a gaggle of uniformed officers. When the inquest asked him why he had gone out there, outside of his jurisdiction, to that backwood no-man's land, he simply replied that he was following up on a lead from an informant. What was he gonna say? That a ghost had told him where to look? That the dead little girl had come back from the grave and told him? That in the dark pre-dawn hours, that twilight time between sick, drunk, and excruciatingly hungover, he had awoken, lacquered in a sweat, his wife snoring loudly beside him, the room spinning, his heart threatening to break free from his chest. And there she would be, a frail little girl at the foot of his bed, her stick-figure limbs draped in a white nightie, its hemline stained in dark crimson streaks. The first time he had seen her, he screamed, horrified, the raspy noise of his own startled voice burning in his dry mouth and throat. His wife awoke and shot straight up in bed. "What is it? What's wrong?" Stanler blinked at his alcohol-swollen eyes. Only darkness. The girl was gone. There's nothing there. It's nothing, honey. Just had a nightmare. Go back to sleep. Okay. His wife said and rolled back over and immediately started snoring again. He lay there till the room grew pale with morning light. His flesh was tingling, wondering what he had seen. wondering if he was going insane. The next time the little girl appeared, he was calmer. He blinked twice quickly, expecting the ghostly form to disappear like last time. But she didn't. She remained right there looking down at him with her cold eyes, sunken deep into their dark sockets. He stared at her in disbelief. Was this real? Could this pale figure possibly be real? That's when she stepped forward to him. Quickly, her blue lips parting as she began to speak. She began to tell him things in a whisper. He could smell the grave on her breath as she murmured things in his ear. About the night her father sold her to Possum. It was a dark night, deep in the backwoods of southern Humboldt. Past the mountains of Alder Point and Blocksburg, the place that didn't even have a name, near Zena, on the Trinity border, where it snowed in the winter and the cold mornings found the hills hardened with ice. The sky was black and it was pouring rain. Her father had been drunk and handled her roughly, pulling her by the arm through the muddy front yard. She was terrified and devastated that her daddy's big Danner boots were splashing mud all over her dress. Her mother had been dead for less than 3 weeks. Her father shoved her roughly through the front door of Possum's trailer. "She's all fucking yours," her father spat at the old bearded man in greasy overalls. Possum shuffled toward her and took her cheeks in his grizzled, calloused hand, squeezing her face tightly, moving her head back and forth for inspection. She's a pretty one." "If you say so," her father said. "She's got that weird eye and those fucked up teeth, but she can cook real good and clean. She's damn handy with the broom." "Aw, yeah," the old man chuckled, handing over a sealed bundle of methamphetamine. She'll do nicely." 2 months later, she was dead and abandoned like so much trash. These sick fucks, how could he let them live? No one had missed Possum. Nobody mourned him. They had thrown him a party. He was a hero. That time. The second time was different. That one had got him suspended, and most likely fired. No pension, no 401k. He might even do some time for that one. Stanler sipped his whiskey and reached down between his legs and lifted up the Beretta, an old pistol his father gave him long ago. He cradled the heavy, cold weight of the gun, waiting for his old boss, that fat fucking piece of shit, to arrive into his nice suburban home. Maybe his wife would find him dead on their well-manicured front lawn. Maybe one of his teenage kids. Oh well. To have a sick fuck like that for a father? Just desserts. It was a warm night. He had the window down, the whine of passing trucks on 101 softly humming in his ears. He thought of Hamlet. He had taken a Shakespearean class back in college when he was studying criminal law, still entertaining the idea of going to law school and becoming an attorney. Before Charlotte got pregnant, he had to quit school and he joined the force so he could start making money for his new family, only for her to give birth to a stillborn boy 7 months later, never to conceive again. Hamlet. The tale of the haunted Danish prince had always stuck with him. Standing atop the castle parapet, the ghost of his father crying out for him to avenge his murderer. Ghost, my hour is almost come, when I too sulphurous and tormenting flames must render up myself. Stanler had always wondered, was Hamlet insane? But no, that would mean they were all insane. Marcellus, Bernardo, all of them. They had all seen it. They couldn't all be insane. It had to be true. The ghost had to be real. The second time the little girl told Stanler to kill, things hadn't worked out like they had with Possum. "My father," she whispered to him. "Kill him." How couldn't he? How could anyone do something so sick as to sell their own daughter? They surely deserved to die. She described his car, where he would be, the pound of meth Stanler would find in the trunk, the Glock he always kept under his seat. Stanler had waited at the Red Lion Motel on Broadway, right where the little girl told him to, and just like clockwork, the car rolled right into the parking lot. Stanler had been amused by the sight of the look on the man's face when he strolled up and pointed his .38 leveled right to the guy's eyes, squeezing off around before that fucking jerk could even utter a word. But there was no meth in the trunk, no gun under the seat, and it ended up that it wasn't even her father at all. At least, that's what the investigators said. They claimed it was some businessman from Santa Rosa. But when Melissa appeared to him the next night, shimmering and ghastly in the moonlight, she told him that no, it was her father. They were lying, all of them, lying liars. The little girl whispered to him in the pale blue lips and graveyard breath. They had been trying to hide it. It was a conspiracy, and they had all fired him because the police chief was in on it too. That's why the police chief had to go next. He had to go. And that's why Stanler's in his car outside his house, the pistol cradled in his hand. He had to kill his old boss, off that meth-dealing, slave-keeping, degenerate son of a bitch. There were more. So many more. Many, many more. The frail ghost had murmured there were many of them. His wife was one of them too. She had made the list. The cheating meth whore, fucking the entire department for crank. The little girl told him all about it late at night, moments before morning, when the earth smelled sweet and silent. It was cold, and his heartbeat made it so it would threaten to leave his chest. Yes, there were many of them. A whole list, and it was a long, long list. I can't help it, Doctor. They're fucking everywhere. Nobody knows but me. Knows what, Larry? About the demons. They're everywhere. Tell me about the demons, Larry. What do they look like? Leathery, shiny black skin, spindly limbs with single claws for feet, wings like a reaper's cloth, and the eyes. Oh my God, the eyes. The man on the couch shuddered. What's wrong with their eyes, Larry? They're huge. They take up half their face. They don't even look like eyes. They look like a million eyes clumped together. They're all red. Okay, enough about what they look like. What makes them so terrifying to you personally? Do the demons have some kind of attraction to you? What is it you don't like about them? Well, I know all kinds of things about them. They go into graveyards and crawl into the earth and feast on the flesh of the corpses at night. They go into food and poison it with their own vomit. They eat the rotting carcasses of animals right off the sides of the roads. They float around people who don't notice them, and they pop their claws into their flesh and inject them with disease and rot and all of the pain of the corpses they fed on before. They're disgusting, loathsome creatures and... Okay, Larry, now tell me where you see these demons. Everywhere. They're in the park. They hover in the air behind families, and they don't even see them. And they pop the claws in their flesh, and they inject disease and... Okay, Larry, you've said that all before. Now, I'll need to see you twice a week from now on. Are Wednesdays and Fridays good for you? Larry nodded as he was led out of the door by the two escorts in white. When it opens up again, the psychiatrist's secretary walks in. Did you find out why that schizophrenic won't eat anything? Yes, I'm afraid he'll have to be force-fed for a while, though. He thinks demons are everywhere poisoning food. We're gonna have to find a way to get rid of his tetranarchophobia. What? His fear of flies. For many years, I've heard the stories of the infamous Kirby Road in Vaughan, Ontario, but it wasn't until recently that I was able to look into it. I was driving to a pre-wedding party at my cousin's groom-to-be's house, and I noticed that the road it was on, Stephanie Boulevard, was right off of this Kirby Road that I've heard the rumors about before. Supposedly, this road often fools with your radio. Your car won't start and all sorts of things that lead people to believe that it's haunted. When I researched this, I found a wonderful blog, which I do owe a great deal of credit for to further my discoveries, as she was able to explain some of the legends around this road, and supposedly 2 haunted houses there as well, and a solitary tombstone of a teenage girl located on the road. I'll be focusing on one aspect of the haunted Kirby Road on this blog. Quote, there are 3 stories concerning these houses. The first one is reported to have a reputation of crying babies and laughing children that most certainly are not there, and a tombstone with the words, Selena, I was a cute child, written on it nearby a house. It's also reputed that if you park your vehicle in the driveway and sit quietly, the little girl, Selena, will run around your vehicle while tapping on it here and there. End quote. And sure enough, I came back from visiting the site for the first time and eventually did find Selena's tombstone. The tombstone is quite unique, not only because of the very peculiar "I'm a cute kid" epitaph, but because of the last name, typeface, and obviously the location. It's located 3 lampposts or streetlights away from the supposedly haunted house. A house my companion and I had decided that we were going to go see after the tombstone. However, plans do change. We did not see the apparition of Selena, didn't hear her laugh or cry, or see anything spookier than a rural road at 1:30 a.m. would be. But part of the legend is Kirby Road includes a truck that will supposedly chase away anyone who comes to investigate it, then suddenly disappear. Some accounts say it's red, some say that it only has 1 headlight. After we were looking at Selena's stone, we decided that we were going to wait till a moving car passed us by, so that it would be slightly safer to walk on the shoulder of the road. But it didn't pass. It pulled over right in front of us and Selena's tombstone. It was a pickup truck, but this one had both headlights, and one that we thought was black. The windows weren't rolled down and nobody got out of the truck. My companion and I found that it was as good a time as any to get out of there, and we proceeded to go back to my car, which we had parked over on Stephanie Road, just under a half a kilometer away. The truck didn't move from its spot for at least 5 minutes. I remind you that this was at like 1:30 in the morning. I suppose that it's entirely possible that the driver just saw 2 people on the side of the road and decided to pull over to see what was going on. Or they too knew what Selena's tombstone was and just happened to be visiting it at the same time. But the fact that no one got out of the car or approached us was in a way peculiar. And the fact that it was a pickup truck at least was a little eerie coincidentally. We didn't get a chance to investigate the house. I know I will certainly make another trip there, as I still do have so much left to discover. Who's Selena? Why does she have a tombstone on the side of the road? What stories about Kirby Road are true? How are they related, if at all? I'm being a little bit dishonest here, as I have discovered the answers to a few of these questions already, but we'll save that for another time, for now. Now let's look at the blog post in full. This past Friday, we decided to check out the 2 houses that we heard about on Kirby Road in Maple, Ontario. It was an interesting experience to say the least. I saw something that would blow my mind, and it's not the first time I've seen a possible apparition. I'll get to that in a little bit. There are 3 stories concerning these houses. The first house is reported to have a reputation of crying babies and laughing children that are not there, and a tombstone with the words "Selena, I was a cute child" written upon it nearby the house. It's also reputed that if you park your vehicle near the driveway and sit quietly, the little girl, Selena, will run around your vehicle and tap on it here and there. I did not experience this suspected phenomenon, but I did see what I believe to be a young girl, around the age of 8 or 9 years old, with a nightgown on, long black hair, sitting in the second tree, the one on the right when you're walking onto the property from the driveway. She was staring back at me. She was leaning outward and staring right at me. It scared the living shit out of me when I caught this apparition out of the corner of my eye, and I turned back to see what I thought was just a shadow. But there it was, clear as day. But then again, I am a believer in the paranormal. We did some voice recordings and photography of this place as well, and we have some interesting photos and recordings of both houses. I'm still trying to go through all of it. The people who own this land are in the process of renovations, and I do not recommend trespassing on people's property. Always ask first before you go paranormal investigating. Always get permission from the owners of the property. And they've torn down the chicken coop as well as being in the process of tearing down the barn, or renovating it, I'm not sure which. Here are some of the items we found in the basement. An old Italian workbook, an old picture book, circa 1854, a Triumph dirt bike, possibly late 40s or early 50s, horseshoes looking very old and very worn. The main house is locked and it's being renovated for occupancy, or possibly occupied already. Again, I must stress this. Make sure you always ask permission before you enter a property. There's also a story of a one-headlight semi-truck that passes under the bridge before you get to the house, and through your vehicle if you park there. Apparently, and I can neither confirm nor deny with any research at this point, this semi-truck was involved in a horrible accident many years back. It may be an urban legend spin-off from the second house that I'm about to talk to you about. You'll see why in a second. The second house, or rather set of houses, has 2 houses on the property, 2 barns, and the flooring on both are pretty dangerous. If you do decide to go check these out, at the other end of Kirby Road by the way, watch your footing and bring good flashlights. Make sure to keep an eye out for skunks, raccoons, and bats. This house is called the Hell House. It has a reputation to have been owned by a family of 7, where the father was involved in the KKK. It's also reputed to be the first larger barn, the gathering place for the KKK. The story goes that the father went nuts and killed his entire family, including a little girl of the same age as the first house. There you'll find a lot of graffiti that says, "You're not alone, murder is awesome," as well as, "I'm watching you." Obviously, this was added later by human hands just to amp up the hype that these houses are haunted. It is said, and it's also possible, that the urban legend transferred to the semi-truck with 1 headlight and the other truck phenomenon at the other house, that a man in a red pickup truck will chase you out of the property. If he catches you, then he'll disappear into thin air. There's also a story of a young woman who is walking on the road. She suddenly screams and then runs into a nearby cornfield screaming bloody murder. This is purported to be about a woman who was attacked, raped, and then murdered in the cornfield near the property. She's supposed to disappear into the cornfield if you follow her. Now, I cannot confirm nor deny any of these stories by research alone at this point. Neither in architectural history or in land history or anything in old newspapers or obituaries as of yet. I can't find any of these other stories either. And we never did find the tombstone. However, I have been told that a few friends of friends who regularly hang out in these areas have seen the tombstone and report being chased by both a red pickup truck and a semi-truck with 1 missing headlight, as well as seeing a woman in the cornfields. How accurate these stories are, I don't know, but I do know that I am sure that I saw something that night that is unexplainable. All 19 of us present at both sites were adults, no children. So how is it I saw a child in a tree at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning? I can't explain it, but I will be researching it, and I will update if I ever do find any information on any of these properties. The Wyoming incident, or the Wyoming hijacking, is a lesser-known case of television broadcast hijacking or hacking. A hacker managed to interrupt broadcasts from a local programming channel, believed to serve several smaller communities in the county of Niobrara, and aired his or her own video. The video contained numerous clips of disembodied human heads, showing them in various emotions and poses. The camera position changed every 15 to 20 seconds. And the video was often interrupted by a quote special presentation announcement. This clip is taken from one of these intervals. This video is mostly locally well known, and would probably never have been that popular if it weren't for the effects it had on few of the residents who watched it for an extended period of time. Complaints included vomiting, hallucinations, headaches, etc. While some believed it was paranormal, specialists have determined that the cause of these afflictions were the frequencies that played throughout the broadcast. In this clip, the frequency being played is somewhere between 17 and 19 Hz. When played for long periods of time, this causes the eyes to subtly vibrate, which can include visual hallucinations. This video is significant in that it's one of the more recent television hijackings. Such actions were rare even in the 80s. Search for Chicago Max Headroom incident, and even more rare today. No hackers have been caught yet, and all attempts to trace the video have proven absolutely futile.
Wyoming today, making him the first to visit in preparation for the 2008 general election. Republican President Jackson. Mitt Romney also plans on visiting Cooper in Cheyenne on his presidential tour.
The 13 Tom and Jerry shorts, made by Czechoslovakian director Gene Dietsch, are infamous for their poor quality and rather disturbing nature, featuring badly done sound effects, animation, and being more realistic to the feel of the violence. Some have speculated that Dietrich didn't like the concept behind Tom and Jerry, and was kinda pressured into making them. And he wanted to make the people who watched his take on it feel bad for liking the concept. What many people don't know is that Dietrich was originally signed on to make more than the 13 episodes the public had access to. But desperate to get out of his contract, Dietrich made one more Tom and Jerry short that very few people have ever seen. The short was called Tom's Basement. It opened up with Tom in the typical Tom and Jerry house. His owner was the fat, angry guy from the other shorts. Tom's owner seemed even angrier than his other appearances. The first scene is him stomping on Tom's tail, in a very realistic and painful looking way, because Tom is sleeping on the basement floor. The owner yells at Tom to never go down there. Tom is clearly terrified and runs away to another room. Our view stays in the room by the basement door. We see Jerry come out of his mouse hole. He looks really grotesque, more far off than the model that he usually uses in the other shorts. He gets this real evil look in his eye and follows Tom into the next room. The next few minutes are pretty formulaic. Jerry repeatedly manages to trick Tom into chasing him into the other room. But every time, the owner catches Tom and inflicts a painful looking injury on him, which stay with Tom even after the scene ends. After 3 beatings, Tom is bruised all over, bleeding from a few places and limping on a broken leg. After this, Tom starts to literally beg Jerry not to bother him anymore. He's not really talking, he's just crying and mumbling. But you can kinda tell what he's doing by his body language. Jerry just laughs at him and pushes him back in the basement. The owner catches Tom again and goes ballistic. The camera then zooms in on his face. It changes color and distorts as he yells at Tom in a much louder voice than any other sound in the cartoon. I can't post what he said on here, but it was definitely vicious and furious. It seems like Jerry has finally decided to take pity on Tom. Jerry picks up a knife that was laying around and stabs the owner in the leg. Pretty graphically, too. Tom opens up the basement door and they carry the owner's body down the stairs. There are dozens of other bodies down there, decaying and showing various other signs of their violent death. Tom and Jerry shake hands, and it seems like they triumph over the serial killer. But Jerry gets an evil look in his eye again, and Tom says in a ghastly deep voice, "Don't you believe it?" Jerry finally stabs Tom, killing him, and throwing his body onto the pile. Then the last shot is Jerry putting up a for sale sign in the front yard of the house, laughing, clearly planning on doing all of this again. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility somewhere in the East. The scientists had theorized that a human without any access to any senses or any other ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the 5 senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed he had nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all of his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connected to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject would retain full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel anything. With no possible way to communicate or even sense the outside world, he was left completely alone with his thoughts. The scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind being jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming that it was just the onset of psychosis, the scientist paid very little attention to his concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking to him. Even more, that he could communicate back. The scientists were pretty intrigued, but weren't convinced. Not until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He reported personal information to the scientists that only their spouse or parents would have known. At that point, a good bit of the scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness would be bombarded with hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against a wall, trying to elicit some kind of pain response. He would be begging the scientists for sedatives, so he could just escape the voices by sleeping. The tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having these severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. 1 day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functioning eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. He said that the voices of the dead were now deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing that contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of his own flesh. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him onto a table, just so he couldn't kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops started to stream down his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head to one of the doctors. Despite his absolute blindness, he focused on eye contact with one of the scientists, and that was the first time in the study. He whispered, "I've spoken to God, and he has abandoned us." And then all of his vital signs just stopped. There was no apparent cause of death either. A follow-up study, year 2000, Dr. G.F. Department of Neurology, hospital name withheld, San Francisco, California. A recent study of degenerative diseases which target the motor function and cognitive decline often leads to hallucinations of the deceased. The death of targeted cells and chemicals in the brain by this disease leads to a loss of smell, among other senses. The cause of the disease is unknown. Hallucinations present in 39.8% of all patients, falling into 3 categories: a sense of presence, a person; a sideways passage, commonly an animal; or illusions. Present in 25.5% of all patients, isolated occurrence in 14.3%. Formed visual hallucinations present in 22.2% of all patients, isolated in 9.3%. And auditory hallucinations present in 9.7%, isolated in 2.3%. The study is continuing in San Francisco, California, 2003 to present. My life seemed to be going pretty well. I had just received my bachelor's degree at the college, and I got a pretty well-paying job as an office manager. The thing is, something felt like it was missing from my life. I wanted love. I wanted to have a wife to keep me company, but the only women I knew worked at the office, and they were drop-dead ugly. After coming home one night from a long day at work, I grabbed a soda and I sat down and booted up my computer. I was really desperate to find love as soon as possible, and it seemed that my only choice was to find it through a dating site. I visited a popular site, registered, and set up my interest in the hopes that I'd be matched with someone soon. The next morning, I woke up and turned my computer on once more. I noticed that there was a total of 2 matches, and strangely enough, one of them was a drop-dead ugly coworker. The other had no profile picture, but the name was unfamiliar. Knowing how desperate I was, I took a chance and private messaged this girl, asking to meet up at a local cafe that night. The person replied back about 3 minutes later, saying okay. I was very excited, but at the same time I was anxious to see how this would go. That night, I was bitterly exhausted from the tremendous amount of work I had to do at the office, but my excitement overpowered it as I got home quickly, changed, and drove off to the cafe. The cafe was only a quick 5 minutes from my house, so driving was no problem at all. I had no problem parking either, and soon enough, I was inside ready to see my blind date. To my utter astonishment, the most beautiful girl I had ever seen in my life approached me. Her most prominent feature was her eyes. The most gorgeous gray eyes in the world. "Hi," she said, smiling. "I'm Christy. You must be David. I saw your picture online." "Yeah, well, I sure as heck didn't see yours," I said, and we shared a laugh. I could already tell we were meant to be. Our first date turned out great. As it turns out, we did indeed have a lot in common. I dropped her off at her shabby apartment building. We partook in our first kiss. I left. At this point, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. Like nothing could go wrong. Christy and I only dated for 4 months before I proposed to her. She said yes with a great excitement. Our wedding went like most, but with an absolute desolate turnout of people. The members of the audience included my mother, her father, a couple of my close coworkers, and a few of her friends. She was just so wonderful, and I was so in love. That night, I lost my virginity to her. Having a child this early in our marriage wouldn't be too good, and I wasn't financially able to afford a honeymoon. But she thought that was alright, and being with each other was all that really mattered. She was just so nice like that, and in place of a honeymoon, I helped her move her things into my humble home, where we would be living together. Our life together was going by so nicely. We were the perfect team. A few months later, I learned that one of my coworkers who attended my wedding, Kevin, was found dead with cuts all over his body. It was unidentified who did it or what really happened. They told me that they were going to medically examine his body in a couple days. This news really brought me down. That made my headache even worse. I had been getting pretty bad headaches, which I presumed was from being overworked. When I got home later that night, it appeared that Christy had already gone to bed. I wasn't very hungry, so I went to my room to join her. I immediately told her about my friend Kevin being found dead. She sat up suddenly and looked at me. She smiled. It was quite odd considering the situation. She said, "Don't worry, he'll be fine." I wasn't sure whether to be surprised or relaxed at her tone, but given her sweet nature, I just ignored it and went to sleep. The following morning, I woke up sick, coughing pretty badly and feeling the urge to vomit. I stayed home from work, which was the only nice part about it, besides the fact of Christy being so caring while I was in my need. "I love you. Feel better," were the relaxing words she spoke to me every so often that day. As night fell, she silently joined me in bed and turned off the lights. About 30 minutes in, I was having trouble sleeping. So I wrapped my arm around Christy in an attempt to hold her. But just then my hand froze. I just couldn't move. Her skin was as cold as ice. "Christy, are you okay?" I asked, but she didn't respond. I turned her over to reveal my wife, but in the most horrific way I could imagine her. I screamed as loud as I possibly could and shoved her away from me. I bolted to the bathroom. What I saw was Christy with her eyeballs were missing, and just empty bloody sockets. Her skin was pale white. I wasn't sure about any other detail, because my eyes weren't fully adjusted to the darkness. I just sat there and cried, until I suppose I fell asleep. Surprisingly, I felt rested and refreshed the next morning, but that quickly turned into fear as I remembered what I had seen. My vision was blurred and distorted, most likely due to my excessive amounts of crying. I had a push to overcome my fears about whatever I had witnessed the night before. I opened the door slowly, making sure that it didn't make a sound. I slowly turned towards the bedroom, and I noticed that she wasn't there. I heard something coming from the kitchen, metal something banging together. I rushed over to check out the scene. That's just when I saw my beautiful wife standing there, picking up pans that she had dropped. As soon as she saw me, she dropped them again. "What the hell happened last night?" she asked, sounded more concerned than angry. I felt like I had to throw up, and I did. I lied. She took the bait, unfortunately. "Oh well, feel better." She kissed me and went back up to cooking breakfast. My weekend wasn't off to a great start. I contemplated what I had seen, and what just happened. I just couldn't explain it. I tried to think past it like it would never happen again. But it did. It haunted my dreams. Her lifeless body, her lack of eyes. But the worst part of my nightmares were what it did. Her body would just stand up like a marionette and put its face to mine, sending this odor of rotting flesh into my nose. "There's no escape," it would whisper coldly. "We'll be together forever." Then it would grin like her regular beautiful smile. The smile that now sends shivers down my back. I thought I was losing my mind. I saw that thing everywhere. It was hiding behind a cubicle, laying down in the park. I was frantic to get away from it. It just wouldn't stop. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted Christy. My Christy. The one I fell in love with. Not this ghoul. I know I needed to end it. The following day I walked into my house, and I saw the body standing in the kitchen, slouched over, just like in my nightmares. I didn't take a minute to think before I grabbed it, shoving it in the oven. Resisting all of its struggles, I closed the door and turned it on. Although it was painful, I was relieved. The oven began to shake violently, and emitted screams which were so pain-filled it was horrible to hear. I ran out of the house. The pain-filled screams went on for another 10 minutes or so. But by then, my house was filled with a thick wall of black smoke. As I walked in, the shaking and screaming had stopped. The house felt dead, silent and eerie, like nothing was alive in the world. I walked up to the oven just to examine the remains, but what I pulled out destroyed me more than that thing ever could have. What I saw was my Christy, my wife, burned beyond return, but strangely, her eyes were completely intact. I fell to my knees just staring. I couldn't believe it. I was there for 15 minutes, 30 as the police started showing up. They came in and picked me up, and of course arrested me for being on the scene of the crime. I was put into a room and questioned, but luckily I was able to get my way out from under their persistent questioning. They concluded that I was a husband who just got home from work, finding the charred remains of his once beloved wife. They told me everything was going to be okay, and that I needed to rent a hotel room while they inspected. I knew it wasn't going to be alright. I knew what I had done, damn it. And do you want to know what's even worse? I still can see her. Whatever. I killed her. I killed her, and I could never forgive myself. I ruined my life, her life, everyone's. I didn't want to go on. But here I am typing this. So, Since I wanted to try to get through my insane depression, I attempted to go to work the next day. As I pulled in, I approached the doors, and I noticed that there was yellow caution tape in front, with a small note stuck to the door, reading, "This building has been condemned from operations until later notice due to chemical exposure creating hazardous working conditions. The State Department of Health." I felt chills run down my spine as I read the note. Not knowing what this would mean to me, I decided to go and get it checked out. I got in the car and sped down the road straight to my doctor. I neared his office and I threw the door open, revealing that I was the only patient there. The nurse escorted me to him, and I asked him if he could test my body for chemical intake. He said yes, and agreeing to do it. Shortly afterward, he diagnosed me with a disorder caused by the inhalation of a certain chemical. Trembling, I pleaded to him to read me the side effects that were included with the inhalation. He read them to me. Effects of inhalation or ingestion involves migraines, vomiting, weariness, and is uniquely linked to strange patterns involving all these senses. Long-term exposure may result in brain damage, mental instability, and severe hallucinations.